Hello and welcome to another swoon-worthy conversation. I am Danica Bloom, and today I am anticipating this is going to be so much fun because I'm talking to book coach Jocelyn Lindsay. And I just want to say, Jocelyn and I met because she had written a testimonial for a program that I'd been looking at for a couple of years, but not joining because I didn't feel like it was a good fit. And then I saw Jocelyn is a book coach. I looked at her website and I was like, oh my God, I want to be Jocelyn when I grow up. If I take this course, maybe I can be more like Jocelyn. I am not more like Jocelyn. I'm still Danica. But I was right in that it was a wonderful thing to see her, to connect with her, because that's the kind of person I am. I will fangirl you if I see something that I think is fabulous. And Jocelyn s- seemed to like me back. So here we are. So, Jocelyn, before we get into some of the questions about being an author and being a book coach to authors, tell me a little bit about your background, just so that folks have some context.
First, you do not have to be more like me. You are amazing like you are. I am so glad you had reached out to me because I love meeting other writers. I love meeting other people in the industry. And I'm always thrilled when somebody reaches out and contacts me to make that connection. That's one of my most favorite parts about this entire business and this entire industry is getting to meet other people. With that said, I specialize in helping authors, especially at this point, women who are balancing a lot of responsibilities in their lives. And they have this idea for a book and they want to get it out there. And that is really my driving mission to my business is helping authors get their voices out in the world. I always wanted to be working with writers. I always wanted to be in the writing sphere. And I think my background in tech and project management really helped me work with writers, my own writing and other writers. But I first, before I started publishing my own books, got into helping other writers because I really felt like I had something to offer that even if it's just like lending my energy or lending my expertise, I'm just mission driven to help writers because that's what the world is. It's stories, it's connections, just like we've connected. And I really think books are a fabulous way to do it.
I I love that you say you're mission driven because that's exactly how I feel coming out of my previous career working in the not-for-profit sector for over 25 years and finding the space where of writers, finding the space, becoming an author myself and needing to rely on others to do my job of becoming a writer. One of the things that I was so drawn to is how collaborative we are. I mean, we do very, very similar things and can share audiences, and yet there's collaboration as opposed to competition. And I love that in the writing sphere.
Yeah, exactly. I came out of looking for services to help me as a writer and finding lots of frustration, finding success. And I just really came into a place where I felt like I could help writers in a way that maybe wasn't really available. I had felt like I had something to offer.
Well, you also work as a slush pile editor, right?
Yes.
I've done competition reading, which kind of feels like slush pile reading, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
yeah, for contests. And so I had this like, oh, I bet that would be a great job. And then part of me thinks, oh no, that would just be a disheartening job. What was that like being a slush pile reader?
Well, one, you really quickly see. I was working with an editor and an agent who was getting 100 submissions a week. And for me, I really saw how many stories were out there, how many people were really turning in ideas for books. And that I remember was the first aha moment. You hear the myths about the slush pile, the infamous slush pile, and you really don't understand it. I mean, I got it intellectually, and I know this exists, but emotionally and seeing it, it was, yeah, it was an amazing experience to see how many books are out there and how many people are really driven to tell stories.
Yeah. So, okay, maybe thinking about drawing on that experience a little bit, what would you say is the biggest difference between a new romance writer and how they approach, for instance, something specific like character chemistry versus an author who is already successful and publishing and selling books?
I think I find for most of the romance writers that are newer that I start working with, it's the emotional intimacy is usually what's lacking. Newer writers tend to think of chemistry. He's hot, she's hot, there's an instant spark, it's insta love. They meet, it's, fireworks, and then they get together and yay, that's it. Now, there are some books that are like that. For a lot of my beginning writers, they really don't understand what successful romance writers do, which is really building that layered emotional internal vulnerability and conflict. They really need to learn how to engineer intimacy.
Yeah.
A lot of the stakes end up being external. They don't really dive into the internal conflict that's feeding the tension of the book. Because really, what you're driving for is you want that happily ever after to be earned.
Yeah.
You really want to get to the end of the book and feel like, phew, we want these people to be together. And man, we didn't know if they were going to be together. I mean, intellectually, as romance readers, we know, well, they're going to get together. But when we're reading, we want to be questioning it still.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
and I think it's just, we know it's inevitable. We don't want to feel like it's inevitable.
Yeah, that is a perfect way to describe it. So, let's say you're working with a newer author, a newer romance author, and you see that they're missing this important element of their story. How do you help them develop that self-confidence in their voice when you're giving them feedback that is like, you kind of missed it here?
Yeah. One of the places that I really focus on working with my clients is their voice. A lot of newer writers are still trying to figure out who they are as a writer. What is their voice as a writer? We tend to lean back on the books we have read and the authors we love, and that's how we learn. And so I really focus on trying to get them to develop that voice. What is it about that writer that's going to make readers come to them? What is their superpower? What is their differentiator? And I think it's trying to find in the writer that things, we talked about it just a minute ago, the passion. What are they mission driven to say? What is about this particular story and these particular characters that is so important to them to get it out in the world? That's the foundational work we start doing to figure out what is this writer's voice? What's trying to come through that often as writers, we put the brakes on because it concerns us. And, it may worry us to just push the accelerator down and go. And so I really try and work with my writers to help instill the courage in them to just the brakes off and just go lean into this voice. It's much easier to pull back if we have to pull back. But the harder thing is to get the writer to lean into it.
That speaks to me so, so deeply. And I'm doing a program in the summer of 2025, which is what we're coming up to, with Sue Brown Moore, who's another book coach who is freaking amazing as well. And it's all around, it's purpose over passion, right? And as a romance author, finding your purpose. And interestingly, I wrote 4 full-length romance novels before I was really able to feel and know what my purpose as a romance author was. I kind of knew what I wanted to be saying.
Right.
But when you're coaching authors, how do you help them recognize their purpose if they're not seeing it themselves? Or can you? Do you have that ability, like that superpower to say, what I'm seeing a lot of is you have got a woman who feels like she needs to be empowered in the bedroom, for instance.
A lot depends on the author about how hard and how far I can push. Sometimes it takes a little bit because you have to build trust. I work solely one-on-one with my authors because that's where I find the biggest transformation happens. I am paying all my attention to them and they're getting the opportunity in a safe space to explore some of these things. And some writers come to romance with something to say and maybe a little bit tentative about saying it. And sometimes it's how do we tease that out? How do we find what it is that they want to say that they either know and are afraid to verbalize, or they maybe don't know and need to figure it out. And so sometimes it's like the slow push and pull of asking so many questions, lots and lots of questions. And sometimes with a writer, I can just say, look, you're dancing around the issue. Once I get enough questions answered, I can usually say, this is what you're going for. And that can be really scary to a lot of writers. I recently had a writer put the brakes on because they needed to what we were saying was really ringing true to them, but it was also very scary. And so they needed to take a break. They needed to slow down a little bit. I often say that book coaching is only, 25-30% about the book. A lot of it comes back to the writer. Who is the writer? What does the writer want to say? What are the obstacles in the writer's way of what they want to say? And so it really depends on the writer, on how hard I can push. Now, I'm not afraid to push if a writer can handle it. I have one writer I'm working with and I'm just like, stop lying to yourself or stop pretending. This is what you're trying to say. Is this what you want to say? And then she can decide, is that really where she wants to go? Is she comfortable going there? Some writers are shy woodland creatures and need to be carefully led out of the forest.
And especially with our first books, I think pretty consistently. So I've worked with, I don't know the number, for probably around 100 authors over the last 10 years. And there is a memoir quality to our first books, right? There's a lot of me, there's a lot of an author's self in their characters. In fact, my first coach, oh my God, my very first book coach, a developmental editor, I was in a program at the university, one of the universities here in Vancouver, and she took apart my heroine and said that she was too stupid to live and that no 40-year-old woman would ever say X, do Y. And I was just I can feel that guttedness again, because there was so much of me in that heroine. And yes, this naive 40-year-old would do and say those things. Oh, I'm feeling the emotions right now.
You tell me that story, Danica, and I want to go back in time and confront that teacher. Because she shouldn't have said it that way.
He sure shouldn't have. It stopped me literally for years from writing because and anyway, so I have a high sensitivity, a very high sensitivity to this.
Yes, most of us absolutely do. And I think especially with romance writers, because romance is the engine of publishing. It is the driver of the publishing industry. Romance drives the industry. And I think it also gets a really bad, it's one of these things that, are you writing romance? You're just writing a romance, aren't you?
Yeah.
And
they're so formulaic.
Yeah. And so I often feel like romance writers, they've got that feeling of they have to prove themselves on a level, especially as newer writers. They feel like there's something that they have to prove to justify and validate the work they're doing.
So what is one thing that you would say that newer romance writers often get stuck on that isn't actually the real problem?
I would say I have two things. One, perfection. Right. And I would say this about any writer. We often get really caught on, is this perfect? Is this the best line, the best character? Should my character be a plumber instead of a lawnmower? We get caught on things that really at the end of the day don't matter. I think that's a big problem. And a lot of that problem, I think, often shows up in the middle of the book. When the story maybe starts running out of steam, sometimes it really does. Because I think that initial spark and then the initial, they all work it out. The end and the beginning are usually the two strongest parts that the writer is feeling. And then it's okay, so now what do I fill the 300 pages in the middle with? And often that perfection comes from, we don't really know what we're trying to say because oftentimes there's nothing driving the middle. So it's just and the middle is where the emotion really should be deepening. I think it's that quest for perfection that often comes from not knowing what to say, and so not being secure in what's being said.
Yeah. Sue Brown Moore has I've just done a program with Sue around root fear and a character's root fear. And I tell you, it has really helped me with that middle part. Like it's just listening to the way she talks about the characters. And you had mentioned it earlier, how sometimes the external conflicts that are the new writers tend to lean on when we really have to come from the internal.
Yes.
And, even though I've now published over 10 books and I've been a career writer like for 30 years, I was still blown away by the idea of this root fear, something that is really inside of us.
And we get caught on thinking that the plot is what matters, and that it's all about the external. And newer writers, I see that in every genre, that it needs to be the plot, the external that's driving the story. A lot of writers just don't understand who the characters are.
Yeah.
So you run out of steam because you don't know enough of who the characters are to figure out what that driving force is that's keeping them going. And, a plot's just an external, it's just an external expression of what's going on inside the character. That emotional journey is what matters. And the plot, the external journey, is just like the physical manifestation of what's going on inside.
It is so true. What do you think we should be keeping in mind when positioning our work out there on the platforms, on the retailers, so that readers will want to pick them up and want to read through and keep reading all of the rest of the books that we have written?
I think one of the biggest things a writer can do that often doesn't have, it starts before the book is even written. And that's really, it's knowing your audience so that you can serve that audience very, very deeply. And you're not just following the latest trends, because you can follow trends. I mean, you can write billionaire romance, or you can write romance about dragons. I mean, you can follow those trends, but if you're not really serving the audience that is deeply involved in those stories, you're just like skimming the level of skimming the surface of it. You're just water skiing along the top. And your stories will ring true while that bubble is happening, while that billionaire dragon romance bubble is happening. But you really want to write to your readers so that you're speaking directly to them, and then that your books will go deeper than just the bubble.
Okay.
I mean, we still talk about the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Decades after the dystopia, we still talk about these certain books that, we still talk about Twilight. We
Right.
still talk about, 50 Shades of Grey is still being talked about. They scratch that itch that readers are looking for to be scratched. And readers want those familiar tropes, but they want you to be deeper than just chasing after them.
How do we know that we're scratching that deeper itch?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to know. I really work these days towards getting my writers to get their work in front of their readers, whether it's just like an ARC reader, a beta reader, not another writer.
Right.
Find a reader that is deeply committed and involved in the romance genre and ask them to read it. Ask them to read a chapter. Ask them to read your blurb, because that's who you want to talk to. And I think as writers, we end up spending too much time talking to other writers, and we need to get in front of our audiences. And I'm finding that with the writers I'm working with, that's a really good way for them to start feeling what it's like to produce stories for readers. Readers come into your book wanting to love it.
Yes.
You've already hooked them. It's how do you keep them? And that's a very different type of review and response than you get from other writers. And I think as writers, we hide behind the work of other writers, of getting caught in these loops of writers looking at our work over and over again. And you need to get it out to readers.
100%. Yeah. and readers of that genre. Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
if they your readers, it's not your sister who's lovely.
No. Yeah. No. Don't ask your cousin who's a military sci-fi buff to read your contemporary romance.
Yeah.
He might like it because he likes you, but that's not your reader.
All right, we've got to wrap up, but I want to know one piece of practical advice about the business side of romance that you would say most authors don't think of until it's too late.
Who I think a lot of them don't think about what it's going to be like to have the book out in the world and needing to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think get readers from your audience into your process and into your book because it is a very, very different experience to be writing for readers than writing for yourself or your aunts or your best friends. But writing for readers is very different. And I think we tend to think writers, we think of things like, okay, I have the idea, I'm working on the idea, the outline, now I'm writing the book. Now I've got the book written. Now I got to we think of it as like a linear process, and it's not. One of the things I try and do with my writers the minute we start working together is we start talking about the other end of the process. What's it going to look like when it's published? What's it going to look like when it's out in the world? How do you get it out there? How do you talk about it? Because if you can't talk about your book in a way that you're excited about and that you love your book, nobody else is going to be excited about it either. And
That's true. That is 100% true. And it is such, that's a place where I really struggle too. That at the very end, when you're like, okay, I've spent X number of months, for some people, X number of years on this. I'm a little bit tired of it, but now I have to be as excited as a new mom or as excited as like I've got a puppy and carry that excitement in all of your engagement.
exactly. And sometimes that means you need some sort of, I don't know, I hate to say the word gimmick, but you need something else to be talking about.
Yeah.
I have a client that is very introverted, very shy. And the thing we did is we found what can you talk about that you're really excited about that you can relate to your book? It's her costume when she goes on stage. She's promoting her book, and that's just the persona she has adopted. Because man, you have got to talk about your book like it is the best thing in the whole wide world. And I guarantee you, your audience and the people you're talking to will get just as excited about it. If you're excited, other people are excited.
100%. Oh, I love that. Okay, perfect way to end. Jocelyn, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your coaching or if they just want to hang out and have a cup of tea with you?
Please come hang out and have a cup of tea with me. I love having a cup of tea with writers. The easiest way is just like Google Jocelyn Lindsay book coach. My URL is jocelynlindsay.com. But if you search on my name, you're going to find my book coaching. You're going to find my authors. You're going to,
you're going to find that kick-ass website. I want this person in my life.
Yes. And please, if you're out there, I want you in my life too. That's what this is all about, getting our stories out into the world.
I love that I have found a kind of a purpose sister in you. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing and for supporting romance authors. And I appreciate you so much.
Oh, well, thank you, Danica. You're wonderful. I'm thrilled to support you and, any of these writers who come along who want to have tea, want to chat. I'm here.
Thank
you so much.